All right, we can do this. Jon Kabat-Zinn is up, and I don't know if he needs much of an introduction. I have an introduction written here, but my guess is most of us know and love Jon. He's one of the founders of mindfulness-based stress reduction. He's been really a forerunner in terms of bringing mindfulness in a secular way to the masses. He's also been speaking at our conferences now, I think, for 10 years, so he's become like a dear, dear, dear friend. And I think the topic that he's going to speak on today is one that's really pertinent for our times, which is, in my words, it's like, what does right action look like? So I think it's going to be a beautiful way of continuing from David's conversation and hearing from Jon about both the inner work that's needed and the outer work that's needed. So I'm going to assume that Jon is ready to go. So without further ado, please welcome Jon Kabat-Zinn to the stage.
Hi. Oh, good. They actually know, without my even saying anything about it, which I was about to do, that I want to see the house lights up. Because this is not a performance. I don't want, to just be the next sage on the stage, so to speak. White sage on the stage to boot. I want to basically be able to make contact with you, not merely through the eyes, but through the heart. And I think people don't, of course, you're harder to see, but because the spots are right up in my eyes. But just know that in some sense, the fact that we're all here together is what's most important. And that there's nobody here who's stayed this long who doesn't really belong here and who's not, in some sense, an absolutely essential locus for what David Simas was just talking about. Okay, that in some sense, we're all cells of the one body politic of not just the country, but the planet, the world. And we need to, in some sense, take responsibility for it. So even the title of my talk, which I'm not sure is up here, is like, I didn't like it once I gave it to them because it's like speaking truth to power is not enough. It's so much speaking. And who knows what the truth is in a certain way. It's all gone to, you like, I like, it's all true, or none of it's true, it's all fake. But it's not all fake. And so we need to, in some sense, retune the instrument of democracy. And the instrument of democracy has everything to do with our willingness to show up, because it is we the people. Maybe it will become we the people, but I doubt it. But I couldn't resist saying that, for Dan's sake, because as much as he's addicted to what are they called? Acronyms. I am aversive to acronyms. You're not supposed to say that as a meditation practitioner, that you have aversion, but I do have aversion to acronyms because you can remember the acronym, but by the time you get to the actual thing, it's all thinking, and you forget that the present moment, and the reason we're all here is because there's something much, much more powerful than thinking, even though human thinking is phenomenally remarkable, okay? But we have multiple intelligences, and I would say if Dan is right about, like, we have 12 years, or if not Dan, but Greta Thunberg, for instance, and the children, and the scientists who talk about global warming, that we would be utter fools to get into meditation to simply reduce our own little stress, or to achieve some kind of je ne sais quoi, transcendent, oneness, or whatever you think this is about in the first place. This practice is much, much too serious for that, and much, much too important for that, and also much too required at the moment. We are in an extraordinary moment, as you've heard and felt, no doubt. I happened to watch Fox News last night, which I never watch Fox News, and I watched, they had the rally in Louisiana. And I must say, the emotions that came up and the lenses through which I took it in were rather terrifying, including the children in there, going like this and clappy and everything else. It's like, because there's a certain element of ussing and theming that was not invented by this president, but that because of all sorts of the unleashing of the self-centeredness with social media, everybody now has the power of New York Times to put out their own opinion. And whatever they want to put out, including Russian trolls and Chinese trolls, and actually completely transform the conversation and the mental space in which we all function. And what could possibly be the antidote to that? What could possibly speak not only truth, but act out of our understanding in a way that would be commensurate with the enormity of the toxicity of the othering? That you can feel the hate, you can feel the contempt, you can feel the dehumanizing. Or let me say, I don't know if you can feel it, but I felt it last night just drinking this in. I have stood on the grounds, on the parade grounds at Nuremberg. And that's where that kind of thing went on. And when this kind of thing happens, very often, before we all become kumbaya and love the Germans or the Japanese or the Vietnamese or whoever it is, millions of humans have to die. And then we're all friends again. The level of insanity of that very real trajectory in our human history since the end of the last ice age and when human history is said to begin, we can't go on with that with 7 billion people on the planet. And the potential for not seizing the moment is so huge that I think that it's almost better not to think about what the shadow side of this would be if we do not actually wake up as a species. And I think that's actually what mindfulness is all about, is it's an opportunity to finish the job that Linnaeus gave us, in a sense, by calling us Homo sapiens sapiens, which means, from the Latin sapere, which means to taste or to know, that we're the species. So that means, how do you know something? You digest it, you apprehend it, you take it in, you bite down on it, you taste it. And when you know something that way, that's a different kind of knowing than reading, like if it were a banana, reading about the banana in the Encyclopedia of Bananas as opposed to taking a bite of a banana. And so in this day and age, I think our calling is to bite down on what is ours to do while there's still a chance to do it. And, it's actually astonishing that it would take a self-professed child on the autism spectrum to be able to even give us an example, speaking to the Congress or to the United Nations, of somebody who is actually, what Dan was pointing to this morning, selfless. She's not doing this for her ego or to get more likes on Facebook. She's doing it because she has deeply looked into, as have so many other thousands of children, the fact that the adults are not taking care of their future, of their planet, in a very, very real way. So I would like to suggest that what mindfulness is all about is waking up on every conceivable level. It's not simply waking up to how do I live a better life or how I navigate the ins and outs of work or family or anything else, as important as those things are, but it's one integrated whole with interconnectedness. Because the first thing that happens when you sit down, how many of you would say that you have a fairly regular meditation practice that you are devoted to? Just raise your hands. So that's, about 75% of the audience. And that doesn't mean that, I'm sure if I asked you, well, I'll ask. How many of you feel like you don't actually meditate enough? Just raise your hands. See, okay. Like, you're okay. You're probably meditating exactly as much as you should. The thought that you're not meditating enough you could be aware of that. You could be mindful of that thought. And if you were mindful of that thought kind of suggests that if you only sat like a statue in the British Museum a little bit longer, something wonderful would happen. And what you're missing is that the fact that you're here sitting at all is so wonderful. You don't need anything else to happen in this moment or the next moment. This is it. But then when you realize that, when you make it real, when you recognize it, then you see that is actually liberative. It's freeing in that moment. And what it frees you from is a small sense of contraction around the personal pronouns, I and me and mine and my skin color or my history or my success or my failure and all those other people that I like, and so I talk with them because you know what? They just say the same thing I say and it makes me feel so good that they say the same thing I say. We agree. And then the people who, I don't want to talk to them because they don't say the same thing they don't think the same thing I think. And David Simmons said it in an extremely elegant way. But I think the important thing now is for us as a species, not just as Americans, to wake up completely. Now, all of you, sort of went to sleep last night, I'm guessing, and then you woke up, right? But I'm not sure that you woke up completely when you got out of bed. We often say, yeah, I woke up this morning, but did you really? So what about we make a commitment now for every single morning when we wake up, ask yourself, did I finish the job? Or have I jumped out of bed on autopilot and I'm already late and, I have no time? And listen to the way your mind might actually tell you, I don't have time. You have nothing but time. As was said earlier, quoting me in the morning, that it's always now, so this is it. And then, so that comes down to a question of like what we understand mindfulness to be. What the real practice is. So the real practice is how we live our lives from moment to moment to moment. It's not sitting in a cross-legged position or doing yoga or standing or walking meditation. Those are all extremely important ways to motivate yourself and to cultivate the muscle, exercise the muscle of mindfulness, if you will, so that you can cultivate greater clarity, greater stability, greater ability in Dan's terms to turn that spoke of the wheel of awareness back on itself. So there's no subject and no object anymore. Let's even invent a new word. There's only awareness-ing. There's no you to be doing it. Because if there were, then you'd create yourself as a great meditator. And now I'm really in pure awareness. And the problem wouldn't be the pure awareness, the problem would be the pronoun, I. So can we expand our understanding of mindfulness and meditation, not just to include heartfulness, as you heard this morning, because they're not separate, but that it has to do with a certain kind of inherited clarity that's not really ours. It's us. That we're more akin to wakefulness or awareness or mindfulness or heartfulness as our kind of constitutive setting of wakefulness than we are to anything else, except that, as the classical teachings offer, and we get to see it every day on TV or in every place else, greed, hatred, and delusion, when you're sitting down, the first thing you notice is usually that something arises, right? I'd be having a great meditation if it was only not for this, Why am I plagued by these thoughts? But the awareness of you being plagued by those thoughts doesn't have a problem with those thoughts. The awareness of you're falling into othering, whether it's the Republicans or whether it's racial or whether it's, a team, a football team or whatever, the awareness of that isn't caught. And so the liberative potential for mindfulness is right in every single moment. Now, the fact that we would be having this mindfulness in America, the idea that this would happen like 40 years ago, impossible. okay? And it's happening, and it's spreading. And for everybody who's here, there are thousands of people, as you heard from Michelle, just in the Forest Service and the government. There are thousands of people who actually are tuned into this dimension of our lives in one way or another, and are beginning to take more and more responsibility for not trying to be better than we are, but to actually get out of the ways in which we prevent ourselves from being, as the US Marines would have it, all we can be. They must have paid an awful lot for that one because they got it right. They nailed it. But it's like you already are all you can be. Every single one of us is. Now, what is the responsibility associated with that? So sometimes people think, and it came up this morning, that meditation is all about stillness. Well, stillness is a very important part of living, but it's not the end of anything. Once you wake up, let's say you wake up, first of all, you wake up completely. So you might see injustice out there in the world. What do you do in the face of injustice? Do you turn away and say, like, I need pleasant feelings in my meditation practice, so I'm going to close my eyes to that? No. You act. So when I use the language that meditation practice is a non-doing, it does not mean doing nothing. It means acting appropriately on the basis of your realization of how things are, to the degree that you can, so you don't get caught in your own ideology, which, as we just heard, so easily contracts around, I'm right and you're wrong, or I'm worthy and you're unworthy, or I won't even let my gaze fall upon you because it just creates anxiety in me. And then just be aware of all of that stuff, and then all of a sudden, you're free from it. As Gabrielle just reported this morning on the subway, just this morning, that, these habits of mind and othering and the kind of racist tendencies that, we like to deny and say, well, I'm not a racist. That's not good enough because, we're all racist in a certain way. And that's been done to us. And if you start to read the history, for instance, in the book Stamped from the Beginning, the absolute shocking history of racism, from the time of like the 1500s and the 1600s and the first slaves coming to America, and people enslaved and coming to America. You see that Christianity and government and even the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution all collaborated in something that was, from our point of view today, a travesty. And a lot of people knew it then, but a lot of people, money talks, right? And they needed people to work the fields because in Jamestown in the 1600s, they were starving. And the Indians were not so helpful. The Native Americans were not all that helpful because they looked at us and they thought, well, these people are ridiculous. This is a short thumbnail history, so I'm sort of taking certain liberties. But the fact of the matter is that this kind of thing has been here from the beginning, and now we have very little time by the clock to actually wake up, okay? And I really feel like what is going on now is showing us that we need actually an upgrade to democracy, that there are certain ways in which even the laws are being so stretched and so tested that we don't actually know from day to day whether the constitutional foundation of our democracy is going to actually endure, or whether the whole thing will fall apart into a kind of not just greed and hatred, but a kind of animosity that is really scary to think about. So we're at a seminal point here where we really do have to take responsibility for teaching this, say, to the next generation. There's just a study out of MIT, the McGovern Neuroscience Center at MIT, looking at mindfulness training in Boston middle schools, Boston public schools, middle schools. Now, middle schools, if any of you think back to middle school, or any of you are in middle school at the moment, it's what the Buddhists would describe as a hell realm. And, And actually, I think David suggested that there could be curriculums that would actually, in middle school, make it like, a civic curriculum that taught you like what it means to actually live in this country or whatever, and what our responsibilities are, not just our rights. But they took kids and studied kids who were randomized between either they get an 8-week mindfulness curriculum that was developed on Cape Cod for the schools there called Karma Choice, or they got, get this, they really thought of a clever comparison group, a coding class, okay, which would actually make you big bucks if you became a coder. That's a skill that would get you, like a really good job potentially. And they compared the kids in terms of like the behavioral issues that get recorded by the school and so forth. And after 8 weeks of mindfulness training, there was a noticeable improvement in the behavior of those kids in middle school. And kids in middle school, act out a lot, especially, So, and then they did a subsample where they looked at their brains, and it turned out that the amygdala, which is the threat reaction and sort of emotional reactivity tissue, or it's not the only center, but it's one of the major sort of nexi of emotional reactivity in the brain. Actually, the activity diminished remarkably in these kids. So, and this is not some fly-by-night scientific organization. This is MIT neuroscience, done at the highest level of scientific rigor. So that alone, plus there's a lot of other studies coming out of Ritchie's lab, you heard, randomized trial with 5, 6, and 7-year-olds in school. I mean, that mindfulness training can actually help you to become a whole human being before you need 30 years of therapy to recover what you had in childhood before it got destroyed by all the greed, hatred, and delusion. That would be a worthy curriculum. And so I think there are an infinite number of ways in which we can bring mindfulness into the world. When I started 40 years ago and set up the MBSR clinic at the UMass Medical Center, in part, I went to MIT. I got a PhD from MIT in the laboratory of Salvador Luria, who won the Nobel Prize while I was in the lab. And we had a lot of problems as graduate students with war research that was being done at MIT, where we developed all the guided missile systems, the MIRV, multi-warhead nuclear bombs. All of that kind of stuff comes out of MIT. I knew the people who were doing that. And we had serious moral and ethical problems with that. And then the faculty would yell at us when we were students, so, why don't you do anything creative? All you want to do is destroy what we've built. So I took that seriously. And MBSR, in some sense, is as much a political example of what can be done when you try to transform an institution, let's say a hospital or a medical school or healthcare. The idea of bringing meditation, from a Buddhist origin, and along with Hatha Yoga to compound the insult and injury, mindful Hatha Yoga, into the mainstream of a medical school and medical center and hospital in 1979, the probability of that being successful was infinitesimally smaller than the probability of the universe that originated with the Big Bang and is expanding, at an accelerating rate, would come to a grinding halt and collapse back on itself. That's a very, very low probability. The probability that NIH would then go on to fund scores, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on meditation research in those past 40 years, that probability was smaller, and yet it happened. My point in saying that is that we don't know what the consequences of our taking a stand in our life are, okay? And when you take your seat, that's just a metaphor for taking a stand. I'm not joking. In the full dimensionality of who you are, your true nature, not something you'll get back to if you meditate for 40 years and go to the Himalayas and meet the Dalai Lama and live in a cave and have water drip on your head and cultivate equanimity. No, you're already who you're trying to recognize. you're already whole. Root meaning of the word health and healing. You're already complete. And when, as you heard from Richie, when you actually drop into silence and you extend that into stillness over days, weeks, months, or even a few hours, it's not just the brain, it's everything in this universe of your organism, trillions and trillions of atoms, and billions of neurons just in your little old head, and then hundreds of trillions of connections that are continually changing on the basis of what you do and how you feel in your experience. Actually, when you drop into non-doing, that transforms in ways that tilt things in the direction of not so caught up in I, me, and mine, not so believing of the narratives of me and my fear or my anxiety or my success or even my failure or even my trauma. All of these are important. There's nothing, the trauma, the success, the failure, that's all part of life. But the me, that's a little bit extra. And when you take a stand in this way, it's almost as if what you are discovering is a new dimensionality to human awareness, to being human. And that is that you can inhabit the domain of awareness. And when I wrote about this as a graduate student at MIT in the political era, when we were like protesting the Vietnam War and all this war-related research, I called it the challenge of an orthogonal institution, of turning MIT itself into an orthogonal institution. From quantum mechanics and geometry, it means a 90-degree rotation. Okay, so this is a rotation in consciousness in which everything's the same, but because you've taken a stand, taking a seat, or standing on your head, or dancing the tango or whatever it is, showing up in the present moment, because you've taken a stand, everything's the same and nothing's the same. Because all of a sudden you've woken up and you've tuned your instrument to a certain kind of understanding of non-harming. It's the root element of the Hippocratic Oath in all of medicine. It's often, betrayed, but there's an ethical dimension to taking one's seat and bearing witness to the actuality of what's going on. And to a first approximation, it's when you see suffering and the causes of suffering, you affirm that you will tune down your own contribution to those causes of suffering, which are just, usually I want more. That's called greed. I hate this. That's called, aversion. Or I don't know what's going on. That's called delusion or illusion. And if you start to check your mind, whether you're sitting on, on a meditation cushion or whether you're walking down the street, you will see that almost always there's one element of greed, hatred, and delusion that's going on for you. Whether it's just I want these sneakers or I don't want her living next to me anymore or whatever it is. I mean, you don't even need Trump. You got a constant warfare going on in your own head about what you want, what you don't want, and how messy it is. And how if you get what you want, that's even problematic because you are for sure guaranteed, and you know this, that if you get what you want, you're going to lose it. But if you get what you don't want, it's going to last forever. So the asymmetry of it is incredibly, there's a certain indignity to it. And of course, it's all delusion. So when we actually practice, what we're doing is we're instantiating, in a certain way, I've never thought this before, I've never said it before, actually good citizenship. I think I'm being inspired by David Simmons' vocabulary. But in some sense, we're taking fully embodied responsibility for the thoughts that we have or the thoughts that we don't even know we don't have that we should have because we are so racialized or we are so segregated or so sequestered in our own little heads that we don't even see the suffering of the other. We don't even see the facial expression on the other. because that would threaten my little happy world. Or just my self-preoccupation, which you have no idea how busy I am. You can be, anybody ever feel like that you're a little bit stressed and a little bit busy? Raise your hands, be honest. Okay, it's like, yeah, that's what's driving us constantly. And where are you going with all this busyness? Yeah, and as soon as that project gets done and I hand it in or whatever it is or the deal gets made, then it will all be better. And you know what? It's never better. It's always like one thing after another, because there's a part of this sort of small I, those personal pronouns, that's never satisfied. Because I want you to affirm me while I don't affirm me. Because I actually know, and then fill in the blank about how horrible or how awful or how compromised or how inadequate or unworthy. You know what all those things are called that I just enumerated? They're called thoughts. Do you know how many of them are true? 0. None of them are true. But if you sit down, which is why it's good to practice, you'll see that it's like a plague. You don't even need to dial up a weather channel. It's like just constant storms in the mind. Sometimes they're more powerful than others, but it's always about me. Bless you. So if it's always about me, and then you see through that the awareness of that is not caught in the me anymore. You're already free. And then you can act. It's not like, non-doing what is not doing anything. You can actually act. You can imagine something and then make it happen in the world. You can talk to people that you've never ever talked to. You can even see people that you see every day and you never actually see them. Because you've got them pegged and they just clean your clothes or your house or whatever it is. But there's so many people that we don't actually recognize as like fellow humans. Not important enough for me to recognize. And you know who suffers from that? Not so much the people that we're not recognizing, because they know that about you. That's a kind of open secret. But you don't know it about you, right? You don't know it about you. Then who's going to suffer? You're the one that's suffering. And who's going to be ignorant? You, because you're ignoring what's most fundamental. So this is truly a liberative practice. As Richie said, retreat experience is really an important part of it. But, life is a retreat if you begin to look at it that way. And if you take it very, very seriously, then formal practice and informal practice becomes a love affair. When you take your seat later today or tomorrow morning, in whatever forms you do that, why not have it be a love affair? A lot of people have played that tune this morning and this afternoon, spoken about love. This is a radical act of sanity to stop and drop in. And ultimately, it took me decades to realize it, but a radical act of love, not sort of narcissistic selfing type love, but a kind of love of interconnectedness. Because the first thing you become aware of when you just drop underneath thinking, because you're not about to shut it off, don't try to shut off your thinking, but if you drop underneath it, then it's just like sounds and the spaces between them, only their thoughts, and their narratives that are very sort of seductive, so they can carry you downstream. But when you drop underneath that, there's just awareness. Or awarenessing, so there doesn't have to be a you even to now build the story of how great a meditator I am. And then you're free. And then you're free to actually relate to other people as who you really, really, really are, as opposed to the caricature or mask that we so often put on because our roles require us to be that kind of whatever and fill in the blank, including mother or father. We get straitjacketed in, like, because I've always done it this way, or my anger comes up and I'm a prisoner of my anger. When I teach in China, the word for mindfulness in Chinese, or ideogram for it is the character for presence, or now, over the character for heart. Now heart. Okay? So in all Asian languages, pretty much, the word for mind and the word for heart is the same word. If you hear the word mindfulness and you're not hearing heartfulness, you're really not understanding. And if you take your seat and you think this is all about cognition and metacognition, you might as well just take the bus or do something else. But if you understand that it's awareness and meta-awareness, that's a whole different story. So it's a radical act of sanity and a radical act of love to actually take your seat. And then, as I said, the real meditation practice is every moment. Now, what might this have to do with speaking truth to power? Well, when you actually, or more than speaking truth, enacting your understanding. 40 years ago, there was nobody who was interested in mindfulness. Now there are millions of people who actually practice I'm talking about in this country and in Western countries. Now people use terms that I don't actually like so much, but mindfulness movement or mindfulness revolution. But it better be mindful if it's going to be a revolution or if it's going to be a movement. And that's our responsibility. It's a kind of distributive responsibility. So if we're all cells of the one body of the planet, well, let's say your heart cells decided that those liver cells, they're ugly. Really, from the point of view of a heart cell, the liver cell's like, come on, And the liver says the same thing right back to the heart, or the lungs, like they're almost nothing, and everything, like, there's nothing there, it's like airheads, the lungs. So just imagine your body goes to war with itself, the heart with the liver, and the lungs get involved, and the bones and everything else. It's like, no, it's one seamless whole. It's one seamless whole, that we are like some completely unbelievable miracle of appearance, that we can even stand on these two little footpads in the gravitational field, have the bones, which would fall into a big pile if they were just bones, actually self-elevate through the gravitational field, hold the head up with all those like trillions of neuronal connections that are changing constantly on the basis of your experience and driven by meditative awareness to optimize functioning in many, many ways. And so what's at stake here is only humanity itself. I think Dan Siegel said it. Seriously, the universe will not care if on this tiny little planet in the middle of unimaginably infinite dark space, that all of a sudden life on this planet took a turn where all those big-headed, sort of big-brained organisms went away. The cockroaches could care less. They'll still be doing their thing. And many, many other organisms. But if we care about our children and our children's children and our grandchildren's grandchildren, then this is it, folks. The diagnosis has already been, sort of written, and it is ignorance and suffering and greed and hatred and delusion. And when, it was like hundreds of years ago, of course, there was enormous amounts of horror and, human-inflicted horror and everything else. That we've reached another level in our weaponry and our cleverness and our internet abuses and bullying, every conceivable way. We're so clever that we're actually creating a nightmare scenario for ourselves. And at the same time, there's so much beauty going on in the world, so much. And so what's our choice? We pour energy into what's right with us, as we say to our patients in the stress reduction clinic all the time. We pour energy into what's right with us. Let the rest of the hospital and the medical team take care of what's wrong with you and see what happens after 8 weeks. And what happens is like people's lives change in ways that often they will say things like, to their doctor, well, that program that you sent me to for 8 weeks, that did more for me in 8 weeks than you've done for me in 8 years. And it's not like MBSR did anything for them. It gave them a context in which to actually heal, in which to learn, to grow, to heal, and to transform. And that's just one human being. But if we do this collectively together, then we become each other's teachers, we become the cells of the one body, we become the flowering of life on earth, and our deep multiple intelligences can thread this needle. What the effect of it will be for the 2020 election, who knows? But this is where the rubber meets the road. So I'd like to say in the final moments that I have here, that this is a distributive responsibility, as I say it. From the very beginning, MBSR was meant to bring what I would call a sort of universal Dharma understanding or wisdom into the world so that it could actually contribute to not just healing individual bodies with stress, pain, and illness, but heal the body politic and the historical wounds for this country that have never ever been acknowledged, never mind healed. I mean, the original genocide, 400 years of slavery and oppression even after the end of slavery. I mean, we need to actually swallow and digest some of the shadow side of our own delusion and ignorance and wake up to the possibility of actually living life as if it really, really, really mattered. And I hope you agree that it does, and that the stakes are really high. So that doesn't mean we should fall into fear and have our amygdalas go all crazy, but to actually learn from the middle school kids that we can actually self-regulate in ways that will be healing and transformative, not merely for ourselves, but for our neighborhoods, for our friends, for the people that we don't usually talk to our communities, to the country, to the world, and that the world is actually not only starving, but actually, I think, dying for that embodied love affair. And it's a distributive responsibility, as I said. So sorry, folks, but it's up to all of us. Thank you.
So thank you, John, and thank to all of you for making a really wonderful and beautiful first day of Mindfulness in America. And I do feel like there's something that's emerging in our world now that's non-divisive and that's desperately, desperately needed. And I think what John and both David touched to in terms of the humanity, who's going to bring back the humanity, into our world? And we probably can't look too much to any political party to do that, or too much to any large media company to do that. There has to be some kind of people's-oriented movement that practices humanity and makes that a priority. So I'm really honored to be in that path with you and exploring that path with you. Buddha always talked about the path that's glorious in the beginning, glorious in the middle, and glorious in the end. And so I definitely feel like there's an invitation that we've all been given, which is, can we take what we learned here today and actually practice it, whether it's with our child or coworker or our partner, the uncle or aunt that we meet at Thanksgiving every year that we have a hard time with, and that we can bring humanity back into the world and hopefully plant seeds that will be really excited for our children and children's children and children's children's children to grow. And even though they probably will never thank us, it's still a worthy endeavor. But thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. Take care.